So the question we're exploring in this episode is, did the Apostle Paul openly teach Jewish mysticism to the Gentiles in his letters? And if so, once we understand these ideas, how does it change our understanding of popular verses? So as you know, in my experience, the more one spends engaging with the rabbinic literature, the more apparent these traditions become within the writings of the New Testament, hidden in plain sight. Often these connections challenge long-held traditional interpretations, and what once seemed to be straightforward moral advice can be now understood to hint at deeply mystical frameworks found in later rabbinic literature. There are a few reasons these ideas have not been apparent or have been lost in time. Number one is many people lack awareness of these traditions and these code words and these frameworks, so they simply don't see them. And two, translators, who are largely part of that first group, seem to have made some faulty assumptions in their interpretations, further obscuring these ideas. We'll unpack a few key examples of this phenomenon, but first, we want to become a little bit acquainted with the tradition of the soul ourselves, so that we can see these ideas. In the Hebrew Bible, the soul is not the same as the spirit. The word for spirit in Hebrew is Ruach, and pneuma in the Greek. The Ruach is the spiritual aspect of a person, and it transcends the body and soul. And the word for soul is often Nefesh. This nuance is found all throughout the Bible, the rabbinic literature, as well as the New Testament. And in 1 Thessalonians 5:23 we see, "Now may the God of peace himself sanctify you completely, and may your whole spirit, soul, and body be preserved blameless." So we see this nuance, and we have many articles and videos about this topic. But for many, the word spirit immediately draws to mind the concept of the Holy Spirit. In some passages in the epistles, this is indeed the subject, but other passages seem to be referring simply to the spirit, or the Ruach, in humans. If a translator were to inadvertently confuse these two, the interpretation would be skewed, and might even miss the point entirely. In the worst cases, this translation error may become the foundation for later theological ideas not intended in the original message. And I think that's exactly what we're dealing with in this focus. Perhaps unfamiliar with the nuance around these traditions, translators made the assumption that Paul's use of the word spirit, pneuma, was a reference to the Holy Spirit. The evidence of their assumption can usually be found in the capitalization of the word spirit in the text. So in Romans 8:4 we see, "So that the righteous requirement of the law may be fulfilled in us who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit." And in this passage, the word spirit is capitalized. We can find other examples of this as well, all throughout. Another key one that we will focus on is Galatians 5. Galatians 5:16 says, "I say, live by the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desires of the flesh." So in this sense, people have largely taken this to mean live by the Holy Spirit. That means under the influence of the Holy Spirit. However, the Greek does not indicate a specific reference to the divine aspect at all. This subtle change pivots the focus of Paul's teaching to the theological concept of the Holy Spirit. This happens in what I believe are key theological passages that, when you strung them together, you get a divergent idea of what the Holy Spirit means, and you get an entirely different read of what Paul seems to be saying in the simple text. The phrases walking in the Spirit, or the fruits of the Spirit, which are affected by this, may not be referring to the Holy Spirit at all, but are simply a comparison between living in the soul, that is the Nefesh, and the Spirit, that is the Ruach, of humans. In a practical sense, these are simply signs that one is walking in one or the other. And Paul seems to go on, in accord with the Jewish tradition, about how to tell the difference. And we'll look at this in a moment. But first we should ask, why would a translator do this? Perhaps we can attribute this to a general lack of knowledge of the topic. It's challenging to preserve Jewish ideas through ancient Greek writings into modern English, especially when you're unaware that these ideas are there in the first place. And in fairness, these teachings have been heavily guarded within the Jewish tradition for quite some time. Now, in Jewish thought, particularly the kabbalistic writings that we see later, the soul is not a singular entity, but consists of 5 levels. And what I mean by that is the texts of the Bible indicate that there are 5 levels, but we see them explained in more detail as Jewish tradition gets more time behind these traditions. But in Romans 8, I believe the primary use of Spirit is not a reference to Holy Spirit, but it reflects the rabbinic language regarding the levels of the soul, particularly Ruach. Now, the Nefesh is the most basic level. It's closely tied to the body, the physical life, our earthly desires, and our basic instincts. Through its association with the body, often the terminology might be described as the flesh. So the Nefesh and the body become a kind of force of opposition to the Spirit. Now, Ruach, which is the Spirit, is the gateway to higher spiritual life. If you have attained a higher level of spiritual awareness, you're likely working from Ruach. Ruach represents our emotions, our speech, our inner spiritual essence, our moral capacity. So according to tradition, one cannot sustainably tap into the Ruach until they have purified their lower level soul and body, aka the Nefesh. This implies that one will have to battle against these lower desires, the desires of the flesh, if you will, and sanctify the quality of one's actions and deeds. The best way to do this is to align these with the wisdom of the Torah. Another way of putting this, in Romans 8:5, for those who live according to the flesh have their outlook shaped by the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit have their outlook shaped by the things of the Spirit. So though there are a few contextual outliers, when the author wants to reference Ruach or Spirit in humans, they use simple terms, and we can see that in Romans 8. When they want to reference the Spirit of God or the Spirit of Messiah, they are generally more specific, and we can see examples of that as well. So in Romans 8, the word Spirit is shown with great diversity, referencing the Spirit in humans at times, the Spirit of God, and even the Spirit of Messiah, which acts as a kind of a bridge between the other two. So rebuilding Paul's message with these ideas in mind, a new understanding emerges that conforms with the later developed kabbalistic writings. You can go back to the website and see an amplified version of this. I've taken a few key passages in Romans 8, and I've written them with some of my own notes in between of this study so that you can get a better flavor of what Paul is saying. And I think the outcome will be surprising. I think you'll find some things there that are very deep that have been largely overlooked. So I encourage you to go back to the website and take a look at that. Again, hiddenorchard.com, and you can find this in the notes below. But from this, a few profound implications emerge. Number one, the focus of this passage reflects a deep mystical idea from the rabbinic tradition. It details the spiritual struggle between living by lower carnal instincts, driven by the body and the animating force, the Nefesh, and how we elevate ourselves through moral and spiritual pursuits, tapping into Ruach and Neshamah. Number two, Paul was openly teaching these ideas to his Gentile audiences, something that I think many people are unaware of. He was showing them a new pathway to spiritual growth, according to the wisdom of the Torah. This, lastly, should open the door for many people to begin studying these concepts, to continue to learn how the tradition has evolved them over time. And not only to understand Paul's words, but to embark on a rewarding and fulfilling spiritual journey. So in conclusion, this revelation for me further solidifies that there is a deeply Jewish worldview within the letters of Paul, perhaps more than we are aware. And I will continue to study and dive into these, but leave some comments below if you have some additional insights of your own and any thoughts as you dive back into the text with this new perspective. That's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed this topic. Remember, you can find more information at thehiddenorchard.com. If you liked what you heard, please leave a review and share this podcast with your friends. We don't really engage in marketing, so it's word of mouth and references like that really help spread the word. Also, I want to say thank you to those who subscribe to the site and those who support the Hidden Orchard Project financially. Without you, it wouldn't be possible, so thank you. Thanks to everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.